The FIRE movement isn't wrong, but the version of it where you retire at 30 and never work another day in your life is effectively dead. If you are aiming for that classic target, living off the 4% rule forever, you are walking into a mathematical trap that could leave you broke by age 55. Safe withdrawal rates are lower, sequence of returns risk is higher, and frankly, starving yourself for a decade just to escape a job you hate is a terrible life plan. There is a much smarter evolution of this idea happening right now. It is safer, it is mathematically more robust, and it does not require you to eat rice and beans until your 30s. It is called slow FI, and today I am going to show you exactly why it beats the traditional path. To understand why the old model is breaking, we have to look at where it came from. Back in the early days of blogs like Mr. Money Mustache or Early Retirement Extreme, the formula was incredibly seductive because it was so simple. You save 50 to 70% of your income, you build a pot of money equal to 25 times your annual spending, and then you quit. You withdraw 4% of that portfolio every year, adjusted for inflation, and history said you would likely be fine. It was a radical shock to the system. It told us that we didn't have to work until 65. But that framework was built during a specific economic era, with specific bond yields and valuation metrics. In 2026, the landscape has shifted. The cost of housing, the volatility of the markets, and the reality of a 50-year retirement horizon mean that the old napkin math is starting to look dangerously fragile. So, if the goal isn't to quit at 30 with a fragile portfolio, what is it? The new goal is optionality. It is about using financial independence tools to gain freedom now, not just an early exit date later. We call this financial independence, retire eventually. Before we dive into the scary new withdrawal rate data, do me a favor. If you want to build wealth without sacrificing your actual life, subscribe to the channel. I break down these numbers every week so you don't have to do the spreadsheet work yourself. It is the best return on investment you will get for your time today. Okay, let's look at the first major crack in the foundation, the math of safe withdrawal rates. The entire premise of early retirement rests on the 4% rule. This comes from the Trinity study and Bill Bengen's work, which looked at 30-year retirements. The idea is that in almost every historical scenario in the US market, a retiree could pull out 4% of their initial portfolio balance, adjust it for inflation annually, and not run out of money for 30 years. That is great if you retire at 65 and expect to live to 95. But here is the problem. If you are retiring early, you are not planning for 30 years. You are planning for 50, maybe 60 years. You need that money to last until you are 90 or 100. And when you extend the timeline that far, the probability of success with a rigid 4% withdrawal rate drops significantly. Morningstar's recent updates and data from researchers like Big ERN suggest that rigid adherence to this rule creates a genuine risk of portfolio depletion. When we stress test the data from 1871 through 2024, looking specifically at 50-year horizons, safe withdrawal rates look different. Research is finding that if you want a 95% success rate, which you probably do because going broke at 80 is not an option, the safe rate is closer to 3.2 or 3.3%. That might sound like a small difference. Who cares about 0.7%? Well, your portfolio cares. If you need $40,000 a year to live, the old math said you needed $1 million. The new math, at a 3.25% withdrawal rate, says you need about 1.23 million. That is nearly 25% more money. You have to work years longer to bridge that gap. We are talking about needing roughly 31 times your annual expenses, not 25. That moves the goalpost drastically further away, right when you thought you were close to the finish line. Now you might be thinking, okay Tom, I will just work a few extra years and save the extra 25%. Problem solved. But unfortunately, it is not that simple. Because even if you hit that higher number, there is a second invisible trap waiting for you the moment you quit your job. It is called sequence of returns risk, and in the current economic climate, it is the single biggest destroyer of early retirement dreams. If you ignore this next part, you could hit your number, quit your job, and still end up back in a cubicle within 36 months. Let's break down sequence of returns risk. On average, the market might return 7 or 8% a year. But averages lie. You don't get the average every year, you get volatility. Sequence risk is the danger that you get bad returns right at the beginning of your retirement. If the market drops 20% the year after you retire, you are in a crisis. You are withdrawing money to pay for groceries and rent from a portfolio that is already shrinking. You are forced to sell more shares at low prices just to generate the same amount of cash. This digs a hole that your portfolio can never dig itself out of, even if the market booms later on. The math shows that your portfolio's survival depends heavily on what happens in the first 5 to 7 years. If you retire into a bear market, your failure rate skyrockets. Consider the recent market context. We have seen high valuations and significant drops. Channels like Two Sides of Fi have discussed this extensively, asking if recent market chaos is blowing up plans. If you retired early with a lean portfolio and immediately hit a 20% drawdown, your safe withdrawal rate effectively shrinks. You might have planned on 3.5%, but mathematically, to stay safe, you now have to cut spending drastically. This creates a terrifying psychological state. Instead of enjoying your freedom, you are glued to CNBC, watching the ticker tape, terrified that you made a mistake. You are technically free, but you are a prisoner to the market's daily moves. This is why the retire at 30 model is so fragile. It assumes a smooth ride that reality rarely provides. If you have a 50-year timeline, you are guaranteed to see multiple massive crashes. You have to plan for them, not hope they don't happen. What usually happens in this scenario? Most people don't actually just keep spending down their portfolio until it hits zero. They panic. They go back to work. But because they have been out of the workforce for 2 or 3 years, and maybe their skills have atrophied, or there is a recession going on, getting back in is hard. They end up taking lower paying jobs just to stop the bleeding. So the retire early plan morphs into a retire for 2 years, panic, and then work part-time plan. And if that is the likely outcome anyway, why did we torture ourselves to save 70% of our income in the first place? This brings us to the third major crack in the traditional FIRE wall, the miserable journey. There is a pervasive myth in the aggressive FIRE community that you can just grit your teeth for 10 years. You hate your job, you live in a tiny apartment, you don't travel, you don't go out to dinner, and you optimize every single penny. The theory is that this decade of deprivation is the price you pay for 40 years of freedom. But we are seeing a wave of regret from people who actually did this. The FIREneers, who coined the term slow FI, point out that traditional FIRE emphasizes deprivation. It makes people miserable for years in jobs they loathe. It turns your 20s and 30s, your prime years for health and energy, into a waiting room. You are effectively putting your life on hold, betting everything on a future date where you will suddenly be happy. Here is the counterintuitive part that nobody tells you until you have already wasted 5 years. If you are miserable saving 50% of your income, you will probably still be miserable when you are spending it. The habit of deprivation is hard to break. I have seen millionaires who still agonize over the price of avocados. But more importantly, there is a distinct possibility that you are overpaying for a product you might never use. This is the die with zero problem, and it is the single biggest inefficiency in the entire FIRE movement. Bill Perkins's book, Die with Zero, highlights a risk that financial nerds often ignore: the risk of oversaving. If you grind yourself into the ground to hit a $2 million target and then the markets actually perform well, you might end up dying with $5 or $6 million in the bank. In financial terms, that is a failure. It means you exchanged thousands of hours of your limited life energy, hours you spent sitting in traffic, sitting in meetings, stressing over deadlines, for money that you never actually converted into joy or experiences. You essentially worked for free for the last 5 years of your career. Slow FI argues that the marginal benefit of shaving 1 year off your retirement date is not worth the marginal cost of being miserable today. Once you are saving 30 or 40%, pushing it to 60% yields diminishing returns on your timeline, but massive penalties on your happiness. This is where the philosophy shifts. The old storyline was grind hard, hate your job, escape. The new storyline, supported by people like Money Flamingo and Dinks on a Bus, is financial independence, retire eventually. It is about using your money to buy freedom along the journey. Instead of waiting 10 years to be happy, you use your partial financial independence to make your life better right now. Maybe that means negotiating a 4-day workweek. Maybe it means taking a 6-month sabbatical to travel while you are still young enough to hike up a mountain without your knees exploding. This approach recognizes that the journey is the point. If your path to FI takes 15 years instead of 10, but you enjoy those 15 years, you have won. You haven't delayed your life. So let's define what slow FI actually looks like in practice. It is not about giving up on financial independence. You are still saving, you are still investing, but you are intentionally using the financial freedom you build to design a life you don't want to retire from. That is the key phrase, a life you don't want to retire from. If you fix your work-life balance, if you find work that is meaningful and low stress, the urgency to quit at 30 evaporates. You no longer need to escape because you are not in prison. You are building a sustainable lifestyle where work is just one part of your day, not the thing that crushes your soul. Mathematically, this works because of diminishing returns on savings rates. Going from a 0% savings rate to 20% changes your life completely. It puts you on a path to freedom. But going from 50% to 60%? It might only shave a year or two off your mandatory working timeline. Is it worth eating ramen for another decade just to quit 18 months earlier? Usually, the answer is no. Slow-fi says, let's settle into a sustainable savings rate, maybe 25 or 30%. That is still huge compared to the average person, but it leaves room for life. It leaves room for a nice vacation. It leaves room for hobbies. And because you are not rushing, you are less vulnerable to sequence of returns risk because you are keeping your income stream active for longer. There is a specific strategy that makes slow FI work almost like magic. It allows you to front-load all your effort in your 20s and then essentially stop saving for retirement forever, decades before you actually retire. It is called Coast FI, and it is the closest thing we have to a cheat code in personal finance. If you understand this one concept, you can stop stressing about your monthly contribution limits and start thinking about how to spend your paycheck. Coast FI stands for Coast Financial Independence. The concept is simple but powerful. You save aggressively early in your career, say for the first 5 to 7 years. You build up a pot of money that is substantial but nowhere near your full retirement number. Maybe it is $200,000 or $300,000. Then you stop. You stop contributing to your retirement accounts entirely. You let compound interest do the heavy lifting. You calculate that even without adding another dime, that initial pot will grow into your full retirement number by the time you hit 60 or 65. You are coasting into retirement. This changes everything because now Every dollar you earn from work can be spent on your current life. You only need to cover your bills. You don't need to save for the future anymore because the future is already funded. Let's put some numbers on this. Imagine you are 25. You grind hard and save until you are 32. By 32, let's say you have $300,000 invested. If you leave that money alone and it grows at an inflation-adjusted 7%, by the time you are 62, that $300,000 will be worth nearly $2.3 million in today's purchasing power. That is a full traditional retirement, fully funded at age 32. From age 32 to 62, you just need to earn enough money to pay for your rent, your food, and your fun. You don't need to save 20 grand a year for your 401k. This opens up massive optionality. You can take a job that pays half as much but is twice as fun. You can work freelance. You can work 6 months a year. You have eliminated the pressure to build a nest egg, which is the hardest part of personal finance. This approach leverages your human capital. In the traditional retire at 30 model, you are throwing away your earning potential right when you are becoming most valuable. You are walking away from your professional network and your skills. CoastFi and SlowFi recognize that you can still monetize those skills, just on your own terms. You don't need to cut off your income abruptly. You can downshift. Diania Merriam from the Economy Conference talks about this, leaving a corporate job to do work she finds meaningful. She isn't retired in the sense that she sits on a beach doing nothing. She is working. But she is working because she wants to, not because she needs to save for a distant future. That is a crucial distinction. It effectively eliminates the risk of boredom and social isolation that plagues so many early retirees. But here is the trap. Most people hear about SlowFi or CoastFi and they nod along, but they don't actually change their behaviour. They keep grinding, keep hoarding cash, and keep postponing their life because they are terrified of taking their foot off the gas. They suffer from one more year syndrome. So, I am going to give you a specific 4-step protocol to actually make this shift without feeling like you are jeopardizing your financial security. The first step is getting to baseline FI habits. You cannot skip the beginning. You still need to spend less than you earn. You still need to cut the bloated expenses, the housing, the transport, the food. You need to get your savings rate up to a respectable level, like 20 to 40%. This creates the gap between your income and expenses that gives you power. Do not mistake slow FI for no FI. If you are spending every dollar you earn, you are not doing slow FI, you are just broke. You need to build that initial safety net. Use the standard math, aim for 25 times expenses as a long-term goal, but hold it loosely. The goal here is to prove to yourself that you can live happily on less than you make. Once you have that confidence, the fear of the future starts to fade. Step 2 is identifying your CoastFi number and hitting it. This is your permission slip to slow down. Run the calculators. Figure out what number you need at age 30 or 35 to grow into a full retirement by age 65. Once you hit that number, you face a choice. You can keep grinding to retire fully early, or you can ease off the gas. This is the hardest psychological step. You have spent years training yourself to be a saving machine. Turning that machine off feels wrong. It feels reckless. But it is the most rational thing you can do. By easing off the gas, you diversify your life portfolio. You stop over-investing in money and start investing in experiences, relationships, and health. The things that actually determine the quality of your retirement. Step 3 is intentional lifestyle redesign. This is where you use your partial freedom. Maybe you ask your boss to go remote. Maybe you drop to 4 days a week. Maybe you take a month of unpaid leave every year. You are using your financial leverage to buy time. Dinks on a Bus calls this living the dream now. Why wait until 60 to spend a winter in Spain? If you are Coast Fi, you can probably afford to do that now if you structure your work correctly. This acts as a stress test for your retirement too. You get to practice retirement. You might find out that van life is actually miserable, or that you hate sitting on a beach. It is much better to learn that at 35 while you still have a career than at 45 after you have quit everything. Step 4 is maintaining a safety buffer. We are not being reckless. We are planning for a 3 to 3.5% withdrawal rate eventually, not 4%. We are keeping our skills sharp so we can always earn money if we need to. This removes the sequence of returns risk because you are never fully dependent on your portfolio during a crash. If the market tanks, you just keep working your low-stress job a little longer. You have flexibility. That flexibility is worth more than $1 million in the bank. It is the ultimate hedge against uncertainty. You are not trying to predict the future. You are positioning yourself to handle whatever the future throws at you. So, here is the reality check. The FIRE movement, as a sprint to do nothing, is dead. The math is too hard, the risks are too high, and the lifestyle is too miserable. But the core principles of FIRE, spending less, investing the difference, and buying your freedom, are more alive than ever. They just need to be applied differently. Don't starve yourself for a decade. Build a baseline, hit Coast Fi, and then start designing a life that you actually enjoy living. Use your money to buy better work, not just no work. Use your money to buy time now, not just time later. The goal isn't to reach a number on a screen. The goal is to build a life that is so good you don't feel a desperate need to retire from it. That is the ultimate financial independence. It is sustainable, it is safer, and it is a lot more fun. You have one life. Don't spend the best years of it making yourself miserable just so you can be rich in the graveyard. Balance is not a dirty word. It is the strategy that actually lets you win the game. I want to hear from you. Are you team grind it out or team slow fi? Let me know in the comments if you have pivoted your strategy recently. And if this perspective helped you breathe a little easier about your financial journey, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel, and it helps me keep running these numbers for you. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.